the most powerful woman in Europe, didn't die quietly. She fell, suddenly, violently, in the heart of the Winter Palace, and within hours the greatest scandal in royal history was born. On a cold November morning in 1796, the palace that had witnessed coups, coronations, and executions now watched something far more unsettling: the final breaths of Catherine the Great and the beginning of a lie that would outlive her. Before we dive further, drop a quick comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Catherine II lies unconscious on her massive imperial bed, the velvet canopy looming above her like a dark red sky. Only hours earlier, she had collapsed in a small private bathroom, her body folding to the marble floor without a cry. Servants lifted her in a panic, rushing her through gilded corridors lit by trembling candle flames. Now, she is barely breathing. Court physicians gather around her in stiff silence, their faces drawn and helpless. They know there is nothing left to save. Catherine's life, 34 years of conquest, reform, war, diplomacy, ambition, and constant motion, is fading out in slow, uneven breaths. By dawn, she will be gone. And almost immediately, something begins to move through the palace, through the city, through Russia itself. A story, a whisper, a seed of poison. It doesn't speak of her campaigns against the Ottomans. It doesn't recall the cultural renaissance she sparked. It doesn't mention the museums she built, or the philosophers she corresponded with, or the empire she reshaped. The world chooses not to remember any of that. It chooses something else, something grotesque. By the time Catherine's body cools, servants are already murmuring that her death wasn't natural, that something happened. Something shameful, something unspeakable. And in the chaos that always follows the death of a ruler lies travel faster than truth. The rumour claims the Empress didn't die from a stroke. It claims she died beneath a horse. As the story spreads, details mutate like a disease. In one version, she engineered a pulley system to suspend a stallion above her. In another, she grew bored of men and sought something else. In every retelling, the ending is the same. The harness snaps, and Catherine is crushed under the weight of her own depravity. It's absurd. It's impossible. And that's exactly why it thrives. A scandal that vile, that theatrical, that humiliating, it's irresistible. It slips from parlours to marketplaces, from the salons of Paris to the courts of Vienna, until the lie becomes more vivid in people's minds than the truth ever could be. But if you peel back the cruelty of the myth, something important remains: the life of a woman who terrified her opponents long before they found a way to defile her memory. Catherine was not born to shake continents. She wasn't even born with a claim to anything greater than a minor German title. She entered the world as Sophia Augusta Frederica of Anhalt-Zerbst, a girl expected to live a quiet, unremarkable life. But Europe's politics have a habit of pulling the obscure into the heart of storms. At 14, she was singled out by the Russian court as a potential bride for the heir to the throne. That heir was Peter, the future. Peter III, a boy who would one day prove disastrously unfit to rule. But in 1744, none of that was known. All anyone saw was an opportunity for a strategic marriage. Sophia's father delivered a single piece of advice before she left: Russia will not adapt to you. You must adapt to Russia. And she did. The young girl travelled across frozen Europe, arriving in St. Petersburg with the determination of someone who understood this was her one chance to escape insignificance. She converted to the Orthodox faith, took the name Catherine, and married Peter in a grand ceremony meant to symbolise stability and unity. But behind the spectacle, the marriage was a slow-moving disaster. Peter was erratic, vindictive, emotionally stunted. He openly insulted Catherine before the court. He spent more time playing with Prussian toy soldiers than attempting to lead an empire. He paraded mistresses before her, and their marriage, for years, remained unconsummated, a humiliation that Catherine endured in tense silence. Every humiliation forced her further inward. Every insult sharpened her understanding of power. Every cold night beside a man who despised her pushed her closer toward the truth she eventually embraced. Survival required transformation, so Catherine transformed. She mastered Russian until she spoke it more eloquently than many nobles. She consumed books by the hundreds, histories, political treatises, philosophical works, anything that could teach her how to navigate a hostile court. She built alliances, not loudly, but quietly, methodically, forming bonds that Peter was too arrogant to notice. In secret, she created a foundation of influence, strong enough to hold up a throne, and then came the moment that tipped everything. Empress Elizabeth died in 1761, and Peter ascended the throne. What followed was a catastrophe nearly unmatched in Russian history. Peter alienated the Orthodox Church with abrupt Lutheran impositions. He infuriated the army by praising Prussia, the very nation Russia had defeated after years of bloodshed. He pushed reforms that offended every layer of the nobility. And worst of all, he made it clear he intended to rid himself of Catherine by divorce, by exile, possibly by imprisonment. He had no idea how dangerous she had become. For 17 years, Catherine had been preparing for a moment like this. 17 years of watching, learning, enduring, calculating. And in 1760, when Peter marched blindly toward his own destruction, she acted, backed by the Imperial Guard and the Orlov brothers, one of whom was her lover. Peter was forced to abdicate. Within days, he was dead. Catherine took the throne at 33. A woman with no Russian blood had just seized the largest empire in Europe. And that moment, that act, is the shadow under which every rumour, every whisper, every obscene lie would eventually grow. Because some people never forgive a woman for surviving, and they never forgive her for winning. Catherine came to power the way storms arrive, suddenly, violently, with a force nobody could ignore. Once she took the throne, there was no hesitation, no gentle transition, no pause for breath. She ruled immediately, decisively, as if she had been preparing her entire life for this single moment. Because she had. The Russia she inherited was enormous, but unstable. A vast, icy beast, stitched together from conquered lands, fragile loyalties, and centuries of fear. To rule it required more than authority. It required imagination. It required will. It required a kind of relentless ambition that few men possessed, and almost no woman was ever allowed to display. Catherine had all of it. She began by reshaping the court itself. Gone were the stifling rituals and the intellectual stagnation of previous reigns. In their place came scholars, architects, philosophers, and scientists from across Europe. Petersburg, a city of cold stone and colder politics, started to glow with something new, ideas. Catherine devoured these ideas. Voltaire, Diderot, Montesquieu, their works filled her libraries and her private thoughts. She didn't just read them, she challenged them, wrote to them, debated their theories from thousands of miles away. For nearly 15 years, she corresponded with Voltaire, and in a strange way, he became her public ally. In Paris, he called her the Northern Star and defended her image as an enlightened monarch. But while Europe discussed her intellect, Catherine focused on something more dangerous: expansion. Russia's borders had always been the source of its insecurity. Too long to defend, too thinly held, too vulnerable to enemies on all sides. Catherine intended to change that forever. Her armies moved like winter wind across the Black Sea frontier. She launched 2 major wars against the Ottoman Empire, shattering Turkish power in the region and securing Russia a permanent foothold on the Black Sea. Crimea fell under her control in 1783, transforming Russia into a naval force that Europe could no longer ignore. In the West, she carved Poland apart piece by piece, participating in 3 partitions that erased the country from the map. With each political maneuver, each treaty signed under pressure of Russian guns, her empire swelled. The map of Europe was no longer shifting around her. She was the one shaping it. And yet Catherine's ambition reached even further. She dreamed of resurrecting the fallen Byzantine Empire, placing her grandson Constantine on a newly reborn Greek throne. The plan, known as the Greek Project, was bold enough to seem mad, but Catherine did not think in small terms. She saw empires like chessboards, and she intended Russia to become the most powerful piece in the game. The project never materialized, but the attempt itself revealed who she truly was: a ruler who refused to accept limits, even the limits of history. Inside her empire, she pursued a different kind of conquest, culture. She gathered art with the hunger of a collector who knew she was building something eternal. Masterpieces from Italy, France, Holland, and beyond were shipped to St. Petersburg in endless crates. The collection grew so massive that she built a new wing of the palace simply to house it. That wing became the Hermitage, a monument to a woman who wanted to turn Russia into something refined, sophisticated, impossible to overlook. But while Catherine built museums and wrote to philosophers, the empire beneath her glittering capital was cracking. Millions of serfs lived in brutal conditions. Families were sold like cattle. Peasants were beaten, starved, and worked to exhaustion under noble landlords who held near total power over them. In 1773, the fragile order shattered. Yemelyan Pugachev, a Cossack with charisma and a dangerous talent for storytelling, gathered thousands by claiming to be Peter III, Catherine's murdered husband, returned from the dead to liberate the oppressed. His rebellion wasn't a skirmish, it was a wildfire. Town after town fell, landlords were slaughtered. Imperial authority collapsed across entire regions. For the first time in her reign, Catherine felt the empire trembling beneath her. She responded the only way she believed would preserve Russia and herself. Her armies marched with ruthless precision. Pugachev was captured, dragged to Moscow in a cage, and executed in a public spectacle designed to freeze rebellion in the blood of the witnesses. His followers were hanged along the roads, their bodies left swaying in the wind. The message was unmistakable: break Russia, and Russia will break you back. The rebellion changed her. Whatever idealistic ideas she once held about improving the lives of serfs evaporated. Stability demanded obedience, and obedience demanded fear. Catherine expanded the nobility's control over their peasants, tightening the chains in an empire already notorious for its brutality. This duality, enlightenment on the surface, iron beneath, became the signature of her rule, but the world rarely judged her for political contradictions. It judged her for something else entirely: her personal life. Catherine's lovers were not secrets, they were part of her court's rhythm. Some were political allies, some were emotional havens, some were young men eager to be chosen. She rewarded them with titles, lands, and estates, and when the affair ended, she ensured they landed softly, often married to wealthy wives or promoted to comfortable ranks. Europe's kings had done worse for centuries. But Catherine was a woman, and women were not allowed to behave like that. Her enemies seized on every relationship. They whispered that she was reckless, depraved, insatiable. They painted her as an empress, ruled by lust rather than strategy, ignoring the fact that many of the men she chose also helped her govern. They ignored the nuance and printed the caricature. It was easier to believe a woman could control an empire with her body rather than her mind. The contempt gathered like storm clouds, rumours mutating in the dark until something far more vicious was ready to be born. A rumour powerful enough to outlive her, a rumour crafted to tear her legacy apart piece by piece. But what it would become, and how far it would spread, no one in Catherine's lifetime could have imagined. A lie was coming, one so obscene it would crush truth beneath it. Catherine the Great's death should have settled her story. It should have ended with a state funeral, a sealed coffin, and a legacy written in the vast territory she expanded and the brutal rebellion she crushed. But instead, the moment she died, something venomous began crawling out from the cracks of Europe's politics. What started as a whisper grew into the most infamous lie in royal history. Her final hours were painfully ordinary. On November 16, 1796, Catherine collapsed in her private bathroom, her body failing without fanfare. Servants carried her to her bed, where she drifted between breaths until she slipped away the next morning. Doctors documented everything: the timing, the symptoms, the stroke, the coma. There were witnesses, records, rituals. Nothing mysterious, nothing scandalous, but truth rarely survives long in a palace. Her son, Paul, refused to defend her. Their relationship had always been strained, poisoned by suspicion, resentment, and the belief that Catherine had stolen both his father's crown and his father's life. Whether Paul truly thought she orchestrated Peter III's murder or simply needed someone to blame, he didn't try to protect her reputation. He didn't even try to stop what came next. And what came next was born in the salons of Europe, not in Russia. France, in the feverish chaos of revolution, hated Catherine for her hostility to their cause. Conservative monarchies resented her reforms and her dominance. Religious traditionalists detested her Enlightenment ideals. And countless defeated rivals, foreign diplomats, exiled nobles, failed conspirators, carried grudges sharp enough to cut. They couldn't challenge her armies anymore. They couldn't undo her victories, but they could do something far more devastating: destroy her legacy. At first, the rumours were simple, the usual attacks aimed at powerful women. She was too fond of young men. She indulged herself. She behaved in ways no respectable woman should. But ordinary slander wasn't enough. Catherine was too vast a figure. To reduce her, the lie had to be grotesque enough to overshadow her entire life. And so the final, monstrous rumour emerged, precise in its cruelty, perfect in its humiliation. It claimed she died while engaging in an act with a stallion, a pulley system, a suspended horse, a snapped harness, a crushed empress. The story was absurd. Physically impossible, biologically ridiculous. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that it was unforgettable. The rumour didn't need facts. It needed imagination. It needed shock. It needed to cut deeper than any political criticism ever could. Within months, the tale spread across Europe, whispered behind fans at aristocratic dinners, murmured in taverns, repeated with delighted disgust in streets and salons. By the early 1800s, it had become entertainment. By mid-century, it crept into gossip books, travelogues, satirical sketches. By the late 19th century, even educated Europeans repeated it casually, as if it were a footnote of history rather than a weapon of slander. It didn't matter how many doctors witnessed her stroke. It didn't matter that no document from the time mentioned anything unusual. It didn't matter that the rumour contradicted physics, logic, and eyewitness accounts. People believed it because they wanted to believe it. A woman who ruled like a man, who conquered, commanded, and dominated on her own terms, was easier to swallow if she could be reduced to a depraved spectacle. And Catherine didn't just rule like a man, she ruled better than most of them. That alone made her dangerous. The horse myth wasn't an accident, it wasn't exaggeration, it was a punishment. Society could accept tyrants, conquerors, and warmongers as long as they were men, but a powerful woman, a woman who chose her lovers, a woman who dethroned her husband, seized the empire, and refused to apologize for any of it. That was unforgivable, so they crafted a legend meant to follow her forever. It didn't matter whether the lie made sense. What mattered was how effectively it overshadowed her accomplishments. And even today, centuries later, the myth remains alive, echoing in jokes, memes, and half-remembered facts repeated by people who have no idea they are participating in a political smear campaign older than their own nations. But what does it say about a society when the lie survives longer than the truth? Catherine's enemies couldn't defeat her in life, so they destroyed her in memory. Yet the most disturbing part isn't that they lied. It's how easily the world accepted the lie over the reality of a ruler who was far more complex and far more formidable than any scandal they could invent. Strip away the rumour, peel back the scandal, and what remains isn't a monster or a myth, but a woman who ruled one of the largest empires on earth with a ferocity and intelligence that terrified the world that inherited her. The truth is this: Catherine the Great was never simple. And that is exactly why her enemies needed to simplify her. She was a ruler who did more in 3 decades than most dynasties managed in a century. She expanded Russia's borders, reshaped its politics, redefined its culture, and positioned it as a force Europe could not ignore. But for every achievement, there was a shadow, and it's in those shadows that historians still struggle to place her. Catherine believed in the Enlightenment. She believed in reason, conversation, philosophy, reform. She read voraciously, wrote essays, drafted laws, debated the great thinkers of her time as if they were equals. Yet she also believed in the whip. She strengthened the nobility's grip over millions of serfs, locking them further into lives of inherited suffering. She crushed rebellions with brutal efficiency, executed dissidents, and tightened her hold on the empire whenever it trembled. Her kindness had limits, her mercy had boundaries. Her patience evaporated the moment her rule was challenged. This contradiction wasn't a flaw. It was the engine of her power. She understood that ruling an empire required two languages, the language of ideas and the language of force. She spoke both fluently. And when you observe her reign through that lens, everything she did, every reform, every war, every calculated alliance, begins to make sense. Catherine didn't aim to be adored. She aimed to be effective. This is why her approach to her personal life was equally pragmatic. Her lovers weren't just companions. They were political instruments, sources of loyalty, and sometimes shields against the crushing weight of the throne. Some were brilliant. Some were foolish. Some burned bright and then disappeared. But Catherine never let intimacy become weakness. Take Grigory Orlov, a soldier, a conspirator, a man whose passion matched her ambition. He helped her seize the throne and nearly became her partner in rule. Their romance ended, but the gratitude remained. Then there was Grigory Potemkin, a man as volatile as he was visionary. Their relationship was something Europe couldn't comprehend. Lovers, rivals, co-rulers, perhaps even secret spouses. Even when the romantic spark died, the political fire never did. Potemkin would command armies, conquer territories, and shape the empire alongside the woman he once shared a bed with. Later favourites were younger, more ornamental, but Catherine treated them with an odd mixture of indulgence and strategy. She rewarded them generously, then released them gently when the relationship ended. Where kings discarded mistresses like broken toys, Catherine ensured her former lovers left her orbit wealthy, protected, and respected. This, too, made her dangerous. Because a woman who enjoys power is a threat, but a woman who enjoys pleasure is a scandal. Catherine's choices didn't fit Europe's mould for womanhood. They didn't even fit the mould for monarchy. She ruled like a sovereign, not a symbol. She loved unapologetically. She built, destroyed, reformed, conquered, punished, rewarded, all with the authority of someone who believed deeply, perhaps too deeply, in her own destiny. And that belief left a mark on history that no lie could fully erase. But the world didn't want to understand her. Understanding a woman like Catherine requires nuance, something propaganda never offers. It was easier to reduce her, easier to twist her power into perversion, easier to mock her than to reckon with the scale of what she achieved. After all, think of what she accomplished. She turned the Hermitage into one of the greatest museums on Earth. She expanded Russia's territory by hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. She redefined the monarchy's role in politics. She stabilized a collapsing empire. She outmaneuvered kings, diplomats, enemies, and even her own husband. She became a symbol of the Enlightenment while ruling with autocratic precision. That kind of life is difficult to summarize. It's far easier to bury it in a single, vulgar rumor. But if the horse myth reveals anything, it's this: powerful women are rarely defeated by armies. They're defeated by stories. Stories travel faster than troops. Stories require no evidence, no witnesses, no logic. Stories stick, especially when they flatten a complicated person into something the world finds easier to mock than understand. Catherine the Great deserved a legacy built on her achievements. Instead, she was handed a legacy built on someone else's imagination. Yet here's the part her enemies never predicted. When you excavate the truth beneath the rumour, Catherine becomes even more formidable. Not because she was perfect, far from it, but because she was real. She was brilliant and brutal, compassionate and calculating, progressive and oppressive. A ruler so extraordinary that the world had to invent a myth obscene enough to overshadow her reality. But her real story, the one written in blood, ink, stone, and territory, refuses to stay buried. History remembers Catherine the Great, not because of the lie, but because the lie could never fully contain the woman who inspired it. And in the end, the only thing truly crushed beneath the weight of the rumour was the truth of how dangerous she really was. If this story kept you watching, drop a like and comment your country or city below. I truly love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. And please, subscribe to help this small channel grow. It means more than you know.